Welcome to Leaders Lead today. I am super thrilled that I have Mathew Lehnig with us today. I'm jazzed. Matthew, Matt, should we call you Matt or Matthew? I mean, I just want to make sure that we address you properly.
I'm good with
Which
either
do
or.
you prefer to go by?
Doesn't
Okay.
matter. It doesn't matter to
I'm
me.
used to. I grew. My oldest friend, Matt Davis. I've known him literally since like before we were born. I mean, that's weird to say, but my parents and his parents were friends growing up, and he came first, and then I came along, and our parents hung out when we were growing up, and so like it was like baby carrier one sat next to baby carrier two. So I just do out of no disrespect, I'll say Matt, just out of like lifelong habit. So Matt,
That's fine.
um, it's an honor to be sitting here with you today. I appreciate it. I've had a couple chances to sit down and chat with you now and get to know a little bit about you and what you stand for. Um, but I know there's a greater community in my network specifically that doesn't have that opportunity yet to get to know who you are, what you're about, and your background. And I am thrilled to have that opportunity today and over this next little micro series to introduce you to them. And without further ado, can you take a few minutes and just introduce yourself to the network?
Sure. So, Mathew Lehnig. I grew up in Imperial Beach, California, which is kind of where the SEAL teams are located now. So, basically, fundamentally, been around that organization for most of my life. My mother worked for NCIS for many, many years. And so she had a lot of friends that were in that community. And, my next door neighbor, Larry, who's a great friend and a great mentor, he was really kind of the one that moved me into that location, eventually a little bit down the road. But yeah, I grew up single mother. I really didn't have much of a father figure. Mom worked from like 6 to 6. So I was kind of raised by my older brother, Greg. Incredible man, but it was, he was only a year and a half older than I was. So it was more the line blind leading the blind, if you will. But in that process, I learned a lot of cognitive skill sets, which helped me along many, many years later. But I went to high school there. And as a matter of fact, I was going through college and my mom passed. And so that really kind of changed the whole trajectory of what I wanted to do because I always knew that I wanted to go into the SEAL teams. But I had other aspirations at the time. But after she passed, I realized, hey, man, life is very short. If you're going to engage, engage now. So from that point on, I went through basic underwater demolition school, made it through the first time, and then had a very incredible 30-year career in NSW. At the highest levels. As a matter of fact, my last command, I ran the most clandestine organization within NSW. So that was an amazing journey. Then after that, I, ended up becoming the VP of programs at Taking Point Leadership, which I've been doing for the last year and a half. Love it. I really found my calling in that, and it's been a blessing. I'm a very faith-based man, and so a lot of my values, the way that I think, is based around that. I'm married. I have 5 children, and I have one grandchild. So again, big family, which is great. I grew up with somewhat the same. I've got an older brother and 3 younger siblings. Um, so that's kind of just a quick overview. I'm sure as we start moving along, you'll ask some other questions, and if you do, we'll get into those. But that's just a quick snapshot of who I am.
Um, let's just so many things.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely dig into those and pull a lot of stuff out of that. It's just how far do you want to go, and I'm willing. So ask the questions, and yeah, let's see how far that takes us. Oh no, you got free reign.
Oh my gosh, I don't know if we have enough time. So, first off, I always like to pause and acknowledge and say thank you for your service. Um, I think that this nation gets a little numb to how they say it and what it means. My personal belief as being a veteran, um, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you. to everyone that's going to watch this podcast, um, and for those that um, maybe this will inspire to once they hear your stories about what does it mean to be a Navy SEAL, what does it mean to have the sacrifices that you've made for this great nation that I love dearly, and the community that we're representing right now as veterans. So from my family to yours, and to everyone that's going to listen to this podcast, we're saying thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think, most people in the military often tend to have that leadership skill of servant leadership. I think that's a reality, right? And so if you're a servant leader most of your life, which I was, military ended up being a phenomenal stepping stone to continue that. And then, of course, through that process, when I came my faith about 17 years, into the military as a servant leader, I did that as well. I preached the gospel to many guys that were going into combat, coming out of combat. I did 3 tours and into combat, and that's really kind of where I found my faith. And I passed that along, and that servant leadership has been a part of my life and continues to be a part of my life now. And I think that, most people in the military, that's a part of who they are. They not only love to serve this country, but they love to serve the people in it.
Yeah, man, that's serious wisdom. To find a greater being right on the trail. So good for you, and I think it's awesome that you talk about it so openly and profoundly, um, and you're extremely proud of it, and it doesn't waver. So
Nope.
that's one of the things that drew me to you, is because of that unwavering faith. Not only the servant military aspect of it, but the ability for you to stand strong in your faith. And I I think that in itself is courage that not a lot of people are willing to do these days. So uh, I respect it a lot. Um, Now, with that being said, 30 years.
Went by quick though. Tell you what.
And I mean, that 30 years, man, that like, holy mo! I did 12 years, like some of it part time, some of it full time, depending on the activation statuses of it, and 30 years full time, training some of the best, doing some um, of the most elite work. I had other words I was going to say. I'm going to say some of the most elite work. And I've never heard someone actually say clandestine until I met you, and actually say that, like you hear about it, like secret sauce-ish, like conspiracy theory stuff on it, on web forums and stuff. But man, you were doing it. So I have all sorts of questions. What Before we get into the actual questions of it, what was the what was just the tempo of that like for you? What was like Talk to us just a little bit about that before we go into like the leadership questions that I have lined up for us to talk about today.
Yeah, I think I was in a very extraordinary situation. I came in a time where you could continuously deploy. And so I had upwards of 17 years of what we call sea duty. Usually, what will happen is people will do like 4 or 5 years, and then they'll go to a shore duty command, and then they'll do that for 3 years and so on. I just stayed in the network for almost 17 years. And so, as a matter of fact, 8 deployments, and I was coming off of my last combat tour, getting ready to do another one. And, the Master Chiefs all came over and they're like, hey, we're going to have to send you over to a training command. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you're setting my trajectory backwards. And by the way, and they're like, and it was interesting because they're like, well, you kind of got to give back to the community. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. 17 straight years of combat, of deployments wasn't enough for you. Okay, well, this is what I would like to do. And then they said, well, unfortunately, we can't do that. And I said, okay, that's fine. But if you send me to Buds, I'm going to put in a commission. And at the time, they were kind of like, yeah, okay, sure, because I was really being kind of mentored by some of the top Master Chiefs on the West Coast. And, I had trained an entire group of elite warriors, so anybody that you saw or see now, I trained, pretty much from 99 to 2000 and to 2002 before I went back to SEAL Team 5. And so all of the names that you've heard out there, I've trained most of those guys. I've deployed with most of those guys, and then eventually, went into combat with a lot of those guys. So that was a phenomenal first step. Once I commissioned, I was really more on the training side of things, training the next generation. So, I was over at Trade at One. I ran Assaults Maritime at TGM, went out to Guam for a couple of years, and then I spent my last 10 years, in a location that was, quite different, but loved it so much that I stayed there. And, training was great. It was just guys were doing amazing things. And to be a part of that, I knew I was a little bit older, and, you have to kind of put that into perspective, the whole running and gunning, 17 years of that took a toll on the body, but to be able to train the next generation to go out there and do just incredible, incredible things has truly been an honor. And so it's both eras I deeply relish. And, it's been a magnificent, magnificent run.
That's impressive. And yeah, I think most people that are in tune with the commercial side of what what leadership names have come out of and are commercially successful of in the military know who those names are.
Yeah.
For the sake of not mentioning it, we're not going to mention them. But the people who know who they are, they know who they are, and
Yep.
I don't have permission, or nor am I going to say their names. But I know who it is, and it's dude, that's rad. And if my kids were here, they'd say, "Dad, stop saying rad."
Well, I think the most incredible part of that was while I was training these guys, I didn't really know that I was going to be deploying with a lot of them. So I think that was really, really, really special because, all of them did fantastic in combat. And so for me, it's like, okay, the things that I taught these guys, the fundamentals, they really stuck and these guys did incredible things, especially, leading a lot of these guys down range, was phenomenal.
Well, we wouldn't know who they were if you didn't do a good job training them. Like I'm just gonna put it that way, and like you did your job. And
That's fun.
Bill Belichick is one of the greatest coaches to ever coach any team sport ever, and he's well known for it, right? And he just retired. Well, I'm gonna call it a semi-retirement from the Patriots. And he 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 cultivated so much talent, and he brought so many people forward and brought out all that talent and helped make people successful and see the best in them. And um, I don't know. I mean, maybe the position that you're in right now with what you're doing in the next tier of your journey professionally is very similar, right? You're continuing to
Yeah.
coach, mentor, and train. And so I think it's very fitting for what you're doing. And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, but don't underestimate the level of that impact. And when you zoom out and you look at everything in totality of what you have going on and how you coached, trained, and mentored those guys and the impact that you've had on them, because it's pretty profound. And you taught them to do their job at a high level proficiency, and they were successful, right? And now look at the continued success that they've had. It's phenomenal, and you put them on a growth trajectory.
Yeah. And I also think, I also had great mentors, right? So if you have great mentors, you become a great mentor yourself and you're able to pass that knowledge on. And that tacit knowledge is extremely important, especially in the field that I was in for 30 years. So I had some great mentors. And even in my process of, even mentoring these guys, I still sought out incredible mentors because I think that that's very important. If you want to completely, you know, disengage and not move forward, you think that everything. The reality is, especially within my last organization, I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but I filled that room with the smartest people to make sure that the job was done and done correctly. And so, the leadership fundamentals go back and forth. You mentor people, you be mentored throughout your entire career, and so that continuous learning cycle is extremely important.
It's critical. I mean, you could have the smartest guy in the room, but if he's not willing to collaborate cross-functionally
Hmm.
with the other
Yeah,
people, it does no good. Especially like as in an example, if he says, "You just have to trust me," and he's not willing to tell you or share with you the tactics, like you gotta trust him, but at the same time, they gotta share kind of what they're doing and talk through the plan. And
absolutely.
without that, there's no camaraderie or bonding that's happening. And it being in the business world, explicit trust is hard to allow.
Sure.
And so I think that it's directly relatable to that military mindset. It's like, hey, walk me through the plan and be vulnerable enough to say, we're going to walk through this plan and we're going to expose it intentionally to find gaps, not because we think you suck, but because we want to find out, are we missing anything? And some people are completely uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, we do a process called what ifing. So we what if everything, and then we
Yeah,
have contingencies for everything, and so we bring a lot of that. Our organization now brings a lot of that, into the business world to make sure because people do it, but they do it not as well as we do. Just like they don't debrief as well as we do. They let egos get in the way. There's a lot of things that, but as you start to coach these guys and you break down those barriers and they start to build that trust, especially, no offense, but we have a little bit of credibility, working for one of the most high performance teams in the world. So,
yeah, I
you know,
completely agree with you.
helps,
That
it helps a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. Um, let's go ahead and let me ask you the first question that we have here that I have for you. We've talked a little bit about your background. We shared it with the audience, and I'm still in awe that I have the privilege of going through this with you. I mean, it's not lost on me. Um, with your extensive background in NSW, for those of you who don't know, is Naval Special Warfare. Now that you're in the corporate leadership development, how do you see the principles of military leadership evolving to meet the demands of today's fast-paced business environments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think for me, it's my experience has been the opposite of that question. And what I mean by that, I think the business world needs strong leadership fundamentals, right? So, military leadership principles, such as discipline, teamwork, resilience, strategic thinking, are highly. I mean, I think they're highly relevant in the corporate environment now, right? So, I think these
Yeah,
fundamentals provide a strong framework for navigating complex challenges. They foster culture and accountability. Um, I think, by drawing from the military's rich leadership heritage as well, because I mean, think about how far that goes back to where, some of the most incredible leaders that, in our military heritage, it's been extremely beneficial. And so we're really, really good at, adapting more rapidly to change, right? And I think the other aspect of it is too is like we really and are really good at inspiring our teams really to go above and beyond, and maintain that growth that we do not only in the military, but we're able to do that in the business world as well. Especially during, as I always like to say, in the business world and in the military, we have what's called, VUCA environments. You ever heard that term? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environments out there, right?
yeah.
And so we thrive. The military thrives in those environments. And to be honest, the business world they've definitely taken notice of that. And they're doing their best to catch up, to implement these fundamentals into their organization.
I I completely agree with that. Like the the ambiguity in dealing with like what I'll call the white space.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone can deal well with white space. And seeing like, hey, we got to get from point A to point B, and then back to A,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's
Well,
your
I think,
mission.
well, I think, Yeah, well, I think the reality is this, right? Is in the military, we're really good at finding all of our our blockages, and kind of our areas that we need to work on, right? So in our organization now, we do a lot of assessments and we do a lot of internal interviews. And what I do is I gather all of that qualitative and quantitative data. And then I find where those shortfalls and those blockages are. I've always been really, really good at looking at data and finding where that is, or if we're in a brief or we're having a discussion. As people are speaking in my mind, I'm formulating what about that, what about that. So I become really, really good at that. So when we gather all that data and I build out these long programs, I focus it really on those gaps and those blockages. And those are those little areas that organizations aren't really good finding themselves. And so that's kind of what we do. And then our programs are based around that. And so that's how we utilize our skill sets from the military to really level up the organizations and take them to a whole new level.
Yeah, I love it because you're doing the different scenario planning for people and helping them click in and get more of a holistic view of scenario planning, right? I mean,
Well, I think the reality is in the military, yeah, we have egos. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you go through some of the hardest training in the world. So one of the newer guys come in, they have these egos, right? But really, pretty quickly, those egos get smashed down because they realize, well, okay, everybody that I'm sitting in the room with is an A-type personality. And so I think we're really good at leaving the egos at the door. What we find in business and between the two is, in corporate, there's a lot of egos out there, right? And so we really bring in the fundamentals of, hey, when we're having these discussions with you, we want to make sure that you leave your egos at that door and you have that self-reflection, because some of the things we're going to tell you right now are going to be hard to hear. They're going to be hard to swallow, but they're going to elevate you as a leader, which is going to overall elevate the organization and the people underneath you.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about the company that you're currently working for. I don't think that we've actually truly mentioned it, and I want so to give people context of the organization you're working at now, post service. So as we go through like the next series of questions, I want to make sure people understand your role in that company, what they do, and kind of the key mission of that company.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about what the name of the company is, who
So
your
yeah,
what
so
your
take
role in
yeah,
it?
yeah, so Taking Point Leadership is the name of the company. I'm the VP of programs within that organization. We're basically a change leadership consulting firm. We work with Fortune 500, 150 organizations really to elevate their leadership skills. But I mean, we're agnostic because we work with a multitude of different organizations. I mean, we can work from IA Tech, also we can work with construction companies and everybody else in between. What we really do is, like I said earlier, is we do a lot of assessments, we do a lot of interviews, we find really where those blockages and those gaps are, and then we build out a very extensive leadership development program. We're not a shock jock company. We're not going to come in and say, hey, do a 1 or 2 day and this is going to change your entire company. We don't do that. What we do is we give actionable takeaways every single time that we do in-person sessions, and then we have you implement those, and then we watch how that fundamentally changes your organization. And we'll probably, over that 10 or 11 months, we'll do anywhere from 8 to 10 in-person sessions, and then in between there we do a lot of touch points and we do a lot of executive coaching. We always start at the C-suite level or at the very high senior executive level, because we want to make sure that the companies at those levels are extremely aligned before we move down into middle management and frontline workers. Because if your head's shed and your leadership isn't aligned, then really a lot of the change initiatives that you're going to be pushing aren't really going to be adapted. And so our job is to go in there and just make sure that these companies are aligned. And again, it's what we did in the military for many, many years. We align our organizations very well. And it's really funny because, you'll hear them, well, we're global, and it's very difficult. And I'm like, really? Because when I was in the military, every single Tuesday, we would have 25 different continents. No, I wouldn't say 25, but 25 different countries, not continents, but 25 different countries calling in, right, from all kinds of different locations. And yeah, we didn't have a problem. And so they sit there and go, oh, well. So, I always hold them to account, when they come up with some of these funny discussions or gestures of, why they can or can't do something. So,
Yeah. Um, I have a personal story about that. There's this thing going on right now for my day job, which I won't say what it is, but the alignment at the top is just to illustrate the alignment at the top. It's so critical to have
mm-hmm.
that like like alignment at that foundational level of your leadership, because the moment that that's not there and they're not all saying and doing and acting at the same point, because a misstep there creates that ripple effect throughout the organization,
Absolutely.
and and then the miscommunication and misdirection that comes out of that when you have a command signal that comes out from that organization, if it's not consistent, it creates chaos.
Sure. It's not so much chaos, it really just breaks the trust in your leadership, right? If the leadership isn't consistent, then that becomes problematic. Sometimes you'll have leaders that, and this is also in the business world, you have leaders that basically go after the next shiny object, and
Yeah.
that causes issues because if you're not finishing the project prior to for that, then there's these ripple effects where now you're taking away all this manpower to focus on this, but you're like, well, we still have this to finish, and you're taking all the manpower and doing this, and then they're like, well, figure it out, and you're like, well, no, that's not how that works, right? And so going back and really kind of breaking those down and really kind of getting some really really good processes in place, which I think is very critical for a lot of organizations out there. You can't do things by the fly. You have to be very specific in what you're doing. And I'm just talking about you can be very agile and you can be very adaptable, but you
Hmm.
have to have your goals set. And then of course how you get there, you let your leaders, get you from point A to point Z. And you as a leader, you correct them along the way if they need correction, but you give them the autonomy to do what they need to get done, right? And you make sure
Yep.
if you utilize the word autonomy, you better maintain that because we do see a lot of companies that will say, well, yeah, my guys are autonomous. And then when we do these assessments, it comes back and they're like, yeah, our leadership are micromanagers. And they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that that's how they see us. And we're like, well, that breaks trust. So,
Yep.
if you're going to say something, do something.
Exactly. And that my word of chaos is exactly describing what you happen, because it does break trust.
Yeah,
And so you have to have that one command signal coming down. And so it's
absolutely.
consistent communication across the organization that's
Yep.
clear and concise. And then you have to deliver upon those things. So
Yep.
I um, I love your explanation of it. Thank you for that master's class on that right there that we all just got from you. That was that was fantastic.